Coronavirus lockdowns and COVID conspiracies are being blamed for a rise in anti-Semitism in Europe.
I think that anti-Semitic conspiracy myths have been there for centuries, and in fact, whenever there is a pandemic, they have come to the fore.
Like here in Berlin, or in Brussels, where the chants spoke of ancient battles between Jews and Muslims.
Of April 4th, 2017. Her neighbor, Kubili Traore, a man convicted several times for violence and trafficking, entered the apartment that shares a balcony with Eleni's own flat. He crossed over from one side of the balcony to the elderly woman's side and broke into her apartment. Traore hit her repeatedly, some 20 minutes. The victim's screams and the killer's own shouting woke up many neighbors. Traore shouted Allahu Akbar and called his victim Satan or Shaitan.
Anti-Semitism and incitement against Jews intensified rapidly, leading us to concentration camps. Thus began the Holocaust. The Holocaust is over. A shocked world pledged never again. But sadly, it doesn't end. It doesn't stop.
Armed guards have been posted at synagogues.
We deal with this hate all over the world.
Freeing many hostages.
65-year-old Orthodox Jew was savagely murdered.
Day to day, week to week,
Juden oder nicht Jude?
month to month.
Breaking news. At this hour, police are on the scene of a deadly shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue.
It is less than 1 month before the International Holocaust Memorial Day on the 27th of January. And it is so sad to see in Brussels today a graffiti that compared the Jews and the Nazis. It is not by mistake.
Excellencies, it's up to us. Anti-Semitism starts with Jews, but it hurts everyone and infects everything. Together, we are able to stop it. Today, we are here to make a decision to transform our statements from words into action, to serve as an example to the world that we will really do everything we can to stop anti-Semitism. And this will only happen thanks to you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a long day, but a productive and a fruitful one. And speaking of fruit, allow me to share with you a great Ukrainian proverb that seems appropriate. Only when you've eaten a lemon do you appreciate what sugar is. Ladies and gentlemen, with that thought, welcome to our gala dinner, where I hope the bitterness of having to talk about the oldest hatred, anti-Semitism, will be sweetened with good food and good conversation. This is an opportunity to meet your fellow delegates and talk about your important work on combating anti-Semitism going forwards. This delegation was made possible thanks to the great cooperation between the EGA, the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, and our dear friends at the Federation of Ukrainian Jewish Communities, whose many and varied talents also extend to providing us with a delicious kosher food this evening. We really hope you enjoy it. Before we go any further, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to share with you a short video about the EGA and its work from 2021.
If the pandemic was meant to slow things down, we didn't get the memo. With rising anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, the EJA rose to the challenge. With 14 press briefings and hundreds of articles in leading media outlets, with a major Holocaust remembrance event streamed to tens of thousands and attended by senior heads of state, with a delegation to Auschwitz of 160 parliamentarians, presidents of parliaments and diplomats. We trained over 100 young Jews and Zionists at boot camps in Madrid and Paris and brought 1,000 young Jewish professionals together. We gathered Jewish leaders and EU commissioners in Brussels. We delivered hundreds of thousands of holiday packages for Jews. We supported 300 scholarships for students of limited means. We ran courses to empower Jewish women leaders. We marked 22 memorials at sites of mass graves. We opened 26 medical lending centers across the continent. We met dozens of presidents, ambassadors and senior political figures to advance Jewish issues. We delivered hundreds of candles to politicians across the continent for International Holocaust Memorial Day. We succeeded in preventing a ban on kosher meat exports in Poland. We awarded Chelsea Football Club and the Chief of Italian Police for their work in combating anti-Semitism. Phew. And now we are taking a well-earned break for 2022. Just kidding. We have even bigger and better plans for the year ahead. More coverage, more flagship events, more putting Jewish issues first. That's the EJA.
Ladies and gentlemen, after that short video, it's a reminder that we're here because of the singular and unflinching vision of a man whose love, care, pride, and respect for the Jewish people, and indeed his native country Israel, are the prime reason for this delegation. Ladies and gentlemen, rabbi also happens to mean teacher, and I've learned much from him and still do every day. This rabbi also happens to be the chairman of the European Jewish Association, and it gives me great pleasure to ask our chairman, Rabbi Menachem Margolin, to officially start our gala dinner. Rabbi Margolin, please.
Dear ministers, members of parliament, diplomats, our partners again in organizing this conference, the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center and the Federation of Jewish Communities in Ukraine, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. They tell a story about a very poor Jew who lived in a small city. He was a poor person. He raised children with very bad conditions. And a day has come, and this Jew had to marry his daughter, but he did not have the means to do so. He asked some of his friends in the city to help him, but in such a small village, everyone were poor, and no one was really able to provide him with support. At one point, his wife told him, "My dear husband, maybe time has come to go to the capital and ask some people to support you, to support us. It is a great commandment in Judaism to support each other. I'm sure, my dear husband, you will find some friends who will support our family to marry our daughter." And the good husband listened to his wife, not that he had other choice, but he did, and he followed his wife's idea. He went on the carriage back to the capital. He arrived to the capital after a few days of travel. And when he arrived, a very human feelings, he felt that he needed to scratch his back. He was looking around, he saw a nice garden, he entered the garden, he took off his jacket, and he started to scratch his back. But it happened to be that this garden was the king's garden, and the king was watching from the window at that time, seeing a Jew scratching his back on his tree. And the king did not like it. A few minutes later, a few soldiers came, arrested this Jew, and they brought him in front of the king. And the king looked at him and asked, "How dare you to come to my garden to scratch your back?" And the Jew responded, he said, "My dear His Majesty, I truly apologize. I did not know this is your garden. If I would know, I would never come and scratch my back on your trees." So the king looked at him and said, "How come? Who doesn't know in this capital that this is the king's garden?" And the Jew responded, he says, "His Majesty, I'm not local. I live in a very small village. And I'm here because it's happened to be that my wife asked me to come here to seek for support to marry my daughter." The king looked at him. He felt that he speaks the truth. And the king asked him, "And how much do you need to marry your daughter?" And the guy said, "I need 20,000 zloty. So it's in Poland. And the king called his assistant and asked him, "Please bring 20,000 zlotys and this to give it to this guy so he will be able to marry his daughter." And the Jew was so happy. He went back home and he told his wife, "I have what we need to marry our daughter." And they organized a beautiful wedding. At the wedding, some of this Jew came to him, his friends, as I said, "Our friend Joseph, could you tell us how quickly could you come back to the city with the amount you need to marry your daughter?" And the guy said, "I have nothing to hide from you. I will tell you exactly what happened. My wife asked me to go to the capital, and I did. I arrived to the capital. I felt that I need to scratch my back. I did so. It happened to me. It happened to be on the garden, on the king's garden. And the king saw me and called me and asked me what it was all about and gave me 20,000 zlotys to marry my daughter." And the Jew friends looked at each other and said, "Well, that's quite a great idea." And on the following day, two of Joseph's friends were on the way to the capital. They arrived to the capital after a few days of travel. When they arrived to the capital, they were looking carefully for the king's garden. They entered the garden, they took off their jackets, and each one were choosing a tree, and they started to scratch their backs. And the king again looking from the window, watching from the window, seeing this time two Jews scratching their backs on his trees. And the king got really upset. And a few minutes later, soldiers came and arrested these two people. And they brought him in front of the king. And the king looked at them and asked, "How dare you to scratch your backs on my trees?" And they said, "Our Majesty, we are truly apologize. We did not know this is your garden." And the king goes, "How come? Who does not know that this is the king's garden? And they said, well, we are coming from a very small city. We need to marry our daughters. And our wives told us to come to the capital to seek for some support. So the king looked at them and asked, and what do you need to marry your daughters? They said, well, we need each 100,000 zlotys. We have huge families. And we have to make sure that they will be in good conditions. And the king looked at them, and a few minutes later, a few soldiers arrived. And the king told them, please take these two people and hang them each on the trees they were scratching their backs on. The people were panicked. They said, but Our Majesty, but why? And the king goes, what do you mean, why? You come to my garden and you scratch your backs? And he says, our king, but we have only one question. Just a few weeks ago, our friends from the same village, he was here, he did exactly the same. And you gave him 20,000 zlotys to marry his daughter. What's the difference? And the king replied and he said, your friend, he was alone. But you are two. You could scratch one the back of the other. So our friends, I was choosing to tell you this story today because in today's situation, we are together. And we are not alone. We have you and you have us. And we do have to scratch each other's backs. In order to survive, we need to be together. Otherwise, our future is exactly the same for both. A few years ago, a great gentleman by name Saul Teichmann passed away in the United States of America. A great man. At his funeral, you could see many kinds of people from different backgrounds. He was a person that supported everyone, anyone who asked him for help. Saul Teichmann helped him. When he was still alive, somebody approached him and asked, Mr. Teichmann, when we look at you, you are not only a person that you help to people who come to you with requests, but you also always initiate projects, ideas, organizations. What gives you this motivation to always look for people who might need your help? And here was the response of Mr. Saul Teichmann. He said, I came from Munkach. In 1943, the Nazis came to my village. And they instructed all the Jews to come to the train station. Nobody knew for what. And I was waiting, as a young boy, I was waiting on the line together with many people. We did not have any clue what we were waiting for. And while I was waiting, an old man came to me and told me, Mr. Teichmann, when were you born? And I said, I was born in 1927. And the guy says, no, are you kidding? I remember he was born in 1925. And Mr. Teichmann says, no, I was born in 1927. I'm 16 years old now. And the guy said, no, it must be a mistake. I remember you. I remember your circumcision. It was in 1925. And the guy says, no, but I know that I was born in 1927. And the guy continued and said, no, my young man, it's a pity. It's a pity that a man does not know, because of issues of papers, do not know when he was born. I remember you. I remember when you was born. You have to remember you was born in 1925. Never said different. A few minutes later, Mr. Teichmann reached to the end of the line. And he was asked by Dr. Mengele, on what year was you born, a young man? And he said, I was born in 1925. And because of that, because he was already 18 years old according to this information, he was sent to life and not to the death. And Mr. Teichmann continues and he said, until today I do not know who was this person who came to me back then. But he was my angel, an angel that came to me and saved my life. And since then, every single day I'm asking myself, to whom can I be today an angel? Life of whom I can change today. And this is a great message for Mr. Teichmann to each one of us. Each one of us could be an angel for someone else. And we shouldn't also forget our angels, those who were our angels, those who gave us good words, those who gave us compliments, those who provided us with help and support and assistance. Ladies and gentlemen, 3,300 years ago on the Mount Sinai, the Jewish people were created. We received the words of God and what He wanted from us. And since then, we know that this is our responsibility to spread in the world justice and charity, integrity, kindness, care for everyone, human beings, animals, and even the environment. We have to be the world's angels, each one of us. And therefore we have to continue, each one of us, day after day, to spread those values, because we truly believe that this is what we are here for. And no matter how hard will it be, we have to continue, because the darker it gets, the brighter we can shine. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored now to invite our next speaker to address the gala dinner. Once again, like the president of the Ukrainian parliament earlier, and despite the immense pressure of office and the external pressures of a current situation, she has graced us with her presence. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my utmost pleasure and indeed privilege to invite the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, Her Excellency Mrs. Stefanishina, to the stage. Please, would you join us?
Thank you so much, first of all, for a correct pronunciation of my surname. Nobody's doing it from the first time, so I think it's already a good beginning. Well, I think that it's really important, like before we will start the discussion in a broader circle with such a distinguished presence, to give some clarity and some understanding how much Ukraine appreciates this, the fact that this dinner is taking place in Ukraine, and how much effort the Ukrainian government, Ukrainian society, Ukrainian Jewish society has been putting into the issues of remembrance of the tragedy of Holocaust. And on the eve of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, Ukraine has a special responsibility also to honor the memory of 1 in 5 million of those who has been murdered on our territory, the territory which has been fully occupied over the Second World War. Over the past 5 years, indeed, Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center has led the efforts also internationally of remembrance and commemoration of the victims of Holocaust with the full assistance of Ukrainian government. And I think a very vigorous presence today and European Jewish community presence here shows that our path which has been chosen is really correct. We, as the Ukrainian government, are fully committed to the implementation of memorial policies toward better society and never again principles. It's my special honor to be here with you today, not for the first time, but for already many times in a row, to do what is needed to preserve the memory of the tragedy for existing and new generations. It's very important that today we have a lot of members of parliaments of different countries present, and today the Speaker of Ukrainian Parliament has been delivering its remarks in the first part of this day. And we made a very clear position of the government by adopting the legislation on the prevention and counteraction of anti-Semitism in Ukraine and around the world. And it's really important that now Ukrainian legislation prohibits any denial of the Holocaust, including any tragedies which Ukrainian nation has been facing over the last centuries, because we know what the tragedy of the nation means. And now I'm here completing with the formal part of the messages which I had to deliver, which are really important because it's really an unprecedented situation when the government is fully committed and supporting to the efforts taken by the Jewish community. You all very well aware that these days Ukraine, my country, face severe challenges. The country fighting a war in the middle of Europe, the country in the face of the new war. And we are very much committed to preserve our independence, preserve our dignity. Again, we know what the tragedy is. Today, when we commemorate the tragedy of Holocaust, first of all, we commemorate the tragedy of those people, victims, families, and even nations who faced these tragedies. But we should never forget that these tragedies were inspired by criminal regimes. They were not inspired by just people. They were inspired by tyrants. And today, we all know who are those who are pushing all the democratic world to go into another tragedies. We feel this pain, we know this history, and we understand how much important it is not only to remember, but to make sure that no other tragedy on a territory of the democratic and free world, which has faced severe challenges following the Second World War, we should all remember that. As we remember each and every serviceman and civilian who faced the aggression of Russian Federation, we know this pain. We know, and still our families remember the tragedies of Goladomor. And these are the tragedies which make us understand the pain which has been there, not only because Ukraine is vigorously represented by Jewish community, but because many of Ukrainians helped those Jewish people to avoid the tragedy which has been happening on the territory of Ukraine. I'm absolutely pleased to welcome all of us at this gala dinner, and I'm absolutely pleased to deliver the remarks on the behalf of the Ukrainian government. And on this Holocaust Remembrance Day, I call on all of us to put a plea in front of your governments and parliaments to make sure that we will avoid another tragedy on the territory of Ukraine, the tragedy of people, but not of the governments and parliament, the tragedies of people who are dying and suffering on their territory. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Prime Minister, for your warm and important words. We wish you nothing but courage, fortitude, and the continuation of your outstanding leadership in these trying days ahead. Thank you. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy the food, and I'll be back to you very, very shortly. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Yes, please. 1 second. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention, very, very briefly. It is now my pleasure to share with you a short clip from the chairman of the board of the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center and chairman of the board, Mr. Natan Sharansky.
Distinguished guests, dear friends, I'm glad to welcome you these days in Kiev, in Babin Yar. Babin Yar is by far the biggest massive grave of Holocaust. It is this symbol of Holocaust by bullets, when 1.5 million Jews in Ukraine, 2.5 million Jews in Eastern Europe, even before the decision about final solution of Jewish problem was taken by Nazis, they were taken from their places, from their towns, cities, and villages, brought to the near yards, forests, and killed, stripped and killed, one by one. It's natural that there is less information about these massive killings than about concentration camps. But the reason why Holocaust by bullets is much less known is also another one. Babin Yar is not only #1 symbol of Holocaust by bullets. Babin Yar is also #1 symbol of the crime of Soviet regime, of the attempts to erase the memory about Holocaust. They tried to erase physically Babin Yar, turning it into kind of place for wastewaters or later for stadium, and to take Holocaust from the pages of history. I was born a few years after the Holocaust. I grew in Ukraine among the killing fields of Holocaust, and we knew nothing about it. We were not permitted to know anything about it. And that's why it is so important that Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, that I have the honor to chair, is making big effort to turn this biggest grave of Holocaust into the biggest museum of Holocaust by bullets research and study center. We are doing it in close cooperation with the Ukrainian government. It is a European project, and we are glad that Parliament of Germany and Parliament of Poland have already special groups of support of our initiative. We are on the way of having such a group of support in Israel, and we hope that more and more parliaments of Europe will join us in these efforts. The victims of Holocaust by bullets should not be forgotten. The lessons for Europe should be learned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sharansky. And now we have another distinguished guest to address you, ladies and gentlemen. He began his diplomatic career in 2002. In 2003 to 2008, he worked as a press attaché at the Embassy of Israel in Moscow and as a political attaché at the Embassy of Israel in Moscow from 2006 to 2008. In 2009 to 13, he held the position of Public Relations Director of the Embassy of Israel in London. In 2015, he was Ambassador of Israel to Kazakhstan. In June 2021, the government of Israel approved the nomination of diplomat Michael Brodsky as the ambassador to Ukraine, and he joins us now. His Excellency, the Ambassador of Israel, please come to the stage.
Thank you very much, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Last week, I visited the city of Vinnytsia, which is a small town just 3.5 hours drive from Kiev. And for me, it was a very emotional visit not only because 90% of the Jewish population of Vinnytsia were obliterated by the Nazis, but also because part of my family were killed there in Vinnytsia region. And my grandmother, who was 20 years old at that time, in 1941, she was imprisoned in a concentration camp. She managed to escape the concentration camp, and she was saved by a local family, and later on she came with us to Israel. This story is not unique. In 3 days, we'll mark the International Holocaust Remembrance Day and honor the memory of 6 million Jews killed by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. About 25% of all the Holocaust victims, 1.5 million people, were killed here on the Ukrainian soil. We call it the Holocaust by bullets, something that Nathan Sharansky has just mentioned. It's annihilation of Jews in Eastern Europe by mass shooting. This is a part of the Holocaust history which is still largely unknown. Tomorrow you have an opportunity to visit Babin Yar. This place has become a symbol of Holocaust by bullets. What happened there went down in history as one of the largest mass murders of civilians during World War II. Mass executions of Jews happened also in other cities of Ukraine. Every town, every village on the way of the Nazi troops has its own ditch or a pit which became a grave for thousands of people whose only guilt was that they were Jews. But it was Babin Yar that forever became a major symbol of the Holocaust in the post-Soviet space. The tragedy was not only the physical extermination of people, but also an attempt to erase the very memory of them. Leaving Kiev, the Nazis tried to obliterate all the traces of their crimes. A special squad had been assigned to the exhumation and burying of the bodies of tens of thousands of victims. The Soviet authorities also tried to destroy, physically and mentally, all traces of the tragedy. For many decades, Babin Yar was also a symbol, a special token of Soviet Jewry. The silencing of the tragedy during the Soviet times, the desire to tell the truth and to preserve the memory of the murdered were among the main reasons for the mass departure of Soviet Jews to Israel. Babin Yar Memorial Complex, which is being built these days, will contribute enormously to the efforts to remember what happened here 80 years ago. It is also an answer to those who deny Holocaust or tried to diminish its scale. It is symbolic that last week the United Nations General Assembly approved an Israeli-sponsored resolution condemning any denial of the Holocaust and urging all nations and social media companies to take active measures to combat anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial or distortion. I'd like to thank the European Jewish Association, the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, and the Federation of Jewish Communities of Ukraine for organizing this delegation. Your visit is an important expression of support to the combined efforts by the Babin Yar Memorial Center, the Jewish community of Ukraine, and the Ukrainian authorities to tell the truth about the Holocaust and to preserve the memory of its victims. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. And just before the main course, we have another short video greeting from the Prime Minister of Belgium, Prime Minister De Croo. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today we commemorate the nearly 6 million Jewish men, women and children who were killed in Europe, victims of the Nazi regime, victims of an unprecedented genocide. In Belgium, our thoughts are in particular with the 25,274 Jewish people and the 354 Roma people. They were gathered at the Dossin barracks in Mechelen and deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. We also honor the victims who are still with us today and for whose testimonies we are grateful, so that the younger generations are fully aware of the darkest pages in our history. That is why we continue to support the research and the education regarding the Shoah, to remind ourselves that the most important value in our society is respect for human life and human dignity. This is also why Belgium is honored to assume the presidency of the International Committee of the Arolsen Archives. These archives will give the general public access to the stories of the victims of the Shoah, so that their memory is passed down through generations. To the survivors and the families of the victims, we promise to continue the fight against all forms of negationism and against the minimalization of the Shoah. We will do so with all political and legal means at our disposal. The genocide committed by the Nazi regime and its collaborators was the culmination of a process that began decades ago, a process that has roots stretching back for centuries. We know how this process works. It begins with words that gradually transform into actions. Words of anti-Semitism, of hatred, that ultimately led to all but destruction of Jewish culture in Europe. 76 years after the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, we still witness surges of anti-Semitism. In some cases, even a return of the old and toxic conspiracy theories. That is why Belgium wants a European strategy, a European strengthening of the fight against anti-Semitism. Making this fight successful requires sustained effort from our side, so that the promise of never again can finally be fulfilled. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy your main course and I'll be back to you shortly. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes you don't need words. The images are enough. I trust you're enjoying yourselves. We also have with us this evening another teacher, a rabbi whose chairmanship of the Federation of the Jewish Communities of Ukraine is emulated and indeed inspires other communities across this great continent. This federation is led by Rabbi Meir Stambler, and I'd like to invite him up to speak with us now. Rabbi Stambler, please join us.
Good evening, dear ambassadors, dear rabbis, distinguished guests. I would like to thank each one of you for coming to Ukraine in such a time. I get phone calls every day, emails, friends. Should we come? Shouldn't we come? Should we leave? Shouldn't we leave? This means very much for us. In such a situation, to come be part of the Jewish community in Ukraine means a lot. I don't know if this story is known, it's not so famous, but there are many stories about Babin Yar, the way people were called in Kiev to come to Babin Yar, to families, women and children, with everything they belong, all their belongings. They didn't even know where they're coming to. They thought they're going to work, they're going somewhere, and they just went. There was one boy that his mother managed on the way to throw him out of the way. He was a young boy. His two older brothers never came back. And he went through many years in different families, local Ukrainian families that took care of him. Every person, every soul has a story behind him. And every soul that was saved, sometimes we see what they added to the world, what the world had besides the life of a person, which is nothing that we can say what it means, the life of a person. But in this case, it happens to be our president, Mr. Zelensky. When he says this story, I think it means a lot why it took so many years to really get to this point of having Babin Yar built professionally with all the help of the government. You see, when we came over here 30 years ago, we still felt some of the leftovers of the communist regime. It's going to take many years to get rid of it. When we came and we met Jews over here, they were like, we apologize. I'm sorry, but I'm Jewish. And that's how they grew up for many years. I was sent over here with a group of young students, actually, by the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And before we get our degree as a rabbi, we must give over something. And each one has to go somewhere else in the world where they send you for a year to study, to give over this whole year to other people. And this is the way we were taught. We are part of over 5,000 emissaries, shluchim of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which 200 families live in Ukraine. Now we're part of the Ukrainian Jewish population and Jewish communities. But if you have seen the Jewish communities the way we met them when we came, these small synagogues that had no electricity and no light, cold. There was only elderly people over there. And all the young people just were looking to move away. And after a few years, nobody believed that it's possible that there should be a Jewish community, Jewish life. They didn't know what Jewish life means. They didn't know what it means Jewish school, what Jewish tradition, what Jewish holidays mean. They had no idea. And thank God, slowly, I don't think it's slowly actually, for 30 years, each city and each town started to develop their community. And it was developed very nice. You saw some of it in the video. But we always had this feeling that nobody really knows anything about what happened to Babin Yar. I see in this project, an educational project, just the way we had to teach Jews what it means to be a Jew, what it means to make Pesach and Purim and you know, different holidays and Torah. We must teach them our history, which is part of the history is in Babin Yar as well. Thank God now, after we have really a renaissance of Jewish life, the way Rabbi Margolin mentioned before, COVID-19 hit us just like it hit the whole world. It hit us between Purim and Pesach. Passover, usually, let's say in a regular community, not the post-Soviet communities, is a holiday that every family really celebrates with his family at home. But over here, the Jews don't know what it means to celebrate. They don't know how to do it. So that's why this is one of our very serious projects that we really invest a lot of logistics, and we have young students coming from the States, coming from Israel. We have over 200 Sedarim, Seder of Jews all over Ukraine gather, with about 200 students that come from the States and from Israel. They join together with local students and they teach them how it's really done. But what do? COVID-19. We were the first ones to close the synagogues. We had to show responsibility. Before the government realized where we're going to, unfortunately, many of our friends from the States, from New York, we saw people dying every day. And in Ukraine, it took time. It didn't go so fast. But we knew how it looks like, and we closed the synagogues. We wanted to show an example of what it means. But what do we do with the Seder Pesach? How do we take care of these Jews? What we actually did is we brought the Seder Pesach to their homes. We got a kit of everything it needs, wine, grape juice, matzah, you name it. And we had to do a explanation, short. People should know how to do, because usually when they came to synagogue or to the hall we rented, they just did what the rabbi told them to do. And now they had to take responsibility for their families. We had over 40,000 kits that came by address to each Jewish family, and that began Pesach. And let me tell you that since then, every time, and we still give out these kits, when we're talking about a Jewish holiday, that means that the Jewish holiday doesn't stay just at synagogue. And it means that it comes home and the whole family really celebrates it. Of course, hopefully this is going to be over with, but this is something very unique that I always say, that in every tough situation, every darkness, there's always a message of light. I would like to thank our partners, the UJA and the Babin Yar, for giving us the privilege to be part of this program. I am sure that for the Ukrainian people to come visit and be part of it in such a time means very much. And I urge you and I beg you to go back to your countries and use all the influence you have to make sure we don't go through a war again. This doesn't make sense, but there's a real risk. We got to do everything we can to help Ukraine stay a democratic country, a country that really cares, a country that really has free speech and free religion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi. Just before our final speaker this evening, you'll find on your tables some headphones. It'll become apparent shortly why we need those headphones, but I would encourage you to unfurl them while I make my introductory remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, if my advocacy and political work has taught me anything over many years, it's that a Frenchman always likes to have a last word. In our case, that's actually a very supremely positive outcome. Our last speaker traveled all the way from Paris to be with us, a Jew whose leadership of a French consistoire took place during some of the darkest days for French Jewry. During that time, he always remained unbroken, unbowed, refused to cower in fear, but instead inspired Jews in France, and whose positivity, whose very light, shone so much further from French borders. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite Monsieur Joël Mergui, the President of the Consistoire de Paris and the utterly beautiful European Centre for Judaism, to join us now. Thank you.
Bonsoir, dobry večer. C'est le seul mot que je connais en ukrainien. Mais je vais faire le reste en français. Et semble-t-il, vous avez des casques que je vais vous laisser le temps de mettre pour vous faire une traduction simultanée. Je vois que beaucoup de personnes comprennent le français, donc ça sera encore plus facile pour moi. Cher Rav Menachem Margolin, chers parlementaires des différents pays d'Europe, cher président de la Fédération des communautés juives d'Ukraine, chers collègues responsables des différentes communautés juives d'Europe, chers amis, c'est toujours avec beaucoup de responsabilité que je rejoins les manifestations organisées par le Rav Menachem Margolin, parce que comme il l'a raconté dans son discours, en rappelant les personnes qui se grattaient le dos, je lui ai dit que j'étais dermatologue et que j'avais des solutions pour toutes les personnes qui se grattent le dos. Et ces solutions, il a raison, c'est d'abord la solidarité que nous pouvons avoir entre nous. Et plus nous sommes ensemble, et plus nous arriverons à avancer et à sentir cette solidarité. Je voudrais, dans ce moment particulièrement émouvant, qui est la semaine de la commémoration de l'Holocauste, de la Shoah, dans ce moment particulièrement fort, redire notre responsabilité non seulement de ne jamais oublier, mais notre responsabilité de transmettre. Je l'ai dit tout à l'heure à quelques journalistes, en atterrissant à Kiev, la première chose que j'ai voulu faire avant de venir vous rencontrer, c'est de me rendre tout seul sur le site de Babia et de lire sur ce site des Teilim. J'ai pu, quand on est seul dans ces lieux, on imagine la souffrance, on imagine les cris, on ressent la douleur. Et j'ai beau avoir des responsabilités depuis de très nombreuses années, avoir été sur à peu près tous les sites mémoriels, je n'arrive pas à retenir ma douleur et mes larmes quand je me retrouve à essayer de penser comment la haine des Juifs a pu arriver à tuer en Europe 6 millions de nos frères et sœurs en éliminant pour eux leur avenir juif. Et dans cette douleur, j'ai pensé, et je voudrais penser avec vous, à tout ce que nous vivons aujourd'hui en Europe, à tout ce que nous vivons aujourd'hui à travers le monde, à ces signaux de l'antisémitisme qui reviennent et ces haines qui sont en train de revenir, comme si toute cette histoire d'il y a moins de 80 ans, comme si toute cette histoire n'avait pas réussi à suffisamment imprégner les nations et les peuples pour que le combat contre l'antisémitisme puisse devenir non pas une réalité, mais une efficacité. Et je le redis régulièrement, quand on combat l'antisémitisme, on arrive en même temps à combattre toutes les autres haines qui existent et qui se développent dans le monde d'aujourd'hui. Je le dis avec colère, parce qu'à chaque fois qu'il y a de la haine qui remonte, je repense à ce que j'ai ressenti tout à l'heure à Babillard, à ce que j'ai ressenti il y a quelques mois à Auschwitz, à ce que j'ai ressenti à Drancy, à ce que j'ai ressenti sur tous ces sites, et je me dis comment le monde n'a pas encore compris. Alors si nous sommes là, et je voudrais remercier tous les parlementaires qui sont là avec nous, parce que vous détenez une partie de la solution, celle des lois, celle de la transmission, celle des pays qui se lèvent et qui se battent. Je voudrais que ce combat, on arrive à le gagner. Et j'ai tendance à dire, et je vous l'ai déjà dit ici à plusieurs reprises, quand je viens prendre la parole devant une assemblée juive ou non juive, ou avec des juifs et des amis non juifs, comme ce soir, qui viennent nous accompagner, je dis qu'on a plusieurs façons de voir la vie. Et nous, responsables communautaires, et avec ma responsabilité d'une importante communauté juive en Europe, on peut la voir avec beaucoup de pessimisme. Quand on voit la remontée des chiffres antisémites, quand on voit les images qui ont été projetées tout à l'heure, quand on voit ces cris de haine dans la rue sans suite. Mais je voudrais la voir aussi avec optimisme. Parce que notre peuple est un peuple qui vit avec l'optimisme. Parce que quand j'entends le rabbin d'Ukraine nous raconter la vie qui renaît en Ukraine, quand je vois qu'il y a 2 ans, comme je l'ai raconté tout à l'heure, le monde entier, tous les responsables, tous les présidents du monde entier, juste avant le Covid, étaient à cette même date, à Jérusalem, pour une conférence internationale contre l'antisémitisme, qui aurait pu avoir lieu à Auschwitz, comme dans le passé, qui aurait pu avoir lieu n'importe où dans le monde, qui a eu lieu à Jérusalem comme une forme à la fois de reconnaissance de Jérusalem comme capitale du peuple juif, comme capitale d'Israël, comme lieu où à la fois on combat la haine, comme lieu où on combat les haines, comme lieu où on se dit, le monde entier est réuni pour se dire, plus jamais ça, on ne touchera plus aux Juifs. Alors oui, je voudrais être optimiste parce que ce qui s'est passé il y a 2 ans, on ne l'imaginait pas peut-être quelques années plus tôt. Je voudrais être optimiste parce qu'il y a ici nombre de présidents de communautés, de présidents, de rabbins, qui à travers le monde se battent pour que le judaïsme continue à exister. Parce que notre responsabilité, je le répète inlassablement, notre responsabilité, oui, c'est de transmettre la mémoire de la Shoah, oui, c'est de ne pas oublier, oui, c'est de savoir qu'à Babillard, il y a eu des meurtres par balles. Mais notre responsabilité aujourd'hui, pour eux, pour ceux que nous pleurons, c'est que le judaïsme continue à vivre. Et l'optimisme, c'est que maintenant il y a une terre d'Israël, il y a un État d'Israël, il y a la moitié du peuple juif qui vit sur sa terre d'origine, et l'autre moitié du peuple juif qui, à travers le monde, regagne les synagogues, regagne ses traditions, revendique son identité, n'a pas honte de ce que nous sommes. Alors continuons, pour eux, continuons à porter avec fierté notre kippa sur la tête, continuons pour eux à remplir nos lieux de vie, continuons pour eux à faire vivre le judaïsme, continuons pour eux à être optimistes, continuons pour eux à nous dire qu'à travers les générations et les générations, à travers les siècles, il n'y a pas un peuple qui a subi autant de haine que le nôtre, mais nous sommes là debout, vivants, nous pleurons nos morts, mais nous construisons la vie. Je voudrais dire aux parlementaires qui sont avec nous, merci de nous accompagner. Et je voudrais simplement vous dire ce que je dis souvent en France, dans un lieu où on a beaucoup parlé des territoires perdus de la République. C'est-à-dire en France, il y a des endroits où on ne peut plus vivre comme juif normalement, mais on ne peut plus vivre comme citoyen normalement. Parce que là où les juifs se sentent mal, l'ensemble des populations se sentent mal. C'est vrai en France, c'est vrai en Europe et c'est vrai dans le monde. Je voudrais dire aux élus des différentes républiques, des différents pays du monde, tant que les Juifs viennent vous voir avec des projets de vie, dites-vous que votre pays se porte bien. Le jour où les Juifs renoncent à avoir des projets d'avenir, c'est que votre pays, votre ville, votre région commence à mal se porter. Espérons que vous aurez devant vous beaucoup de responsables de la communauté juive en France et en Europe et dans le monde qui continueront à venir vous apporter des projets de vie et d'avenir. Cela voudra dire que les pays que vous représentez se portent bien. Continuons à lutter contre l'antisémitisme, qui est la base de la lutte contre toutes les haines, et continuons à construire un avenir où le judaïsme continuera à briller, mais quand le judaïsme brille, l'humanité brille aussi. Merci.
Ladies and gentlemen, it seems that a Frenchman requires a last word because he's often right. What a powerful, powerful speech. Thank you, Mr. Mergui. What a wonderful way to finish our dinner this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude our dinner. Of course, we have some delicious dessert for you. Just want to take a moment to thank the members of staff, both from the European Jewish Association, from our colleagues at the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, and of course the Federation of Ukrainian Jewish Communities. Forgive me, Raf Stambler, for that. It's been our absolute pleasure to look after you, and we look forward to an important day tomorrow at Babin Yar. In the meantime, from me, your host, Alex Benjamin, enjoy the rest of your dinner, and see you in the morning. Thank you so much.